In the hushed chambers of history, where the dust of centuries settles like a soft veil over forgotten tales, there are whispers that still carry on the wind, whispers of rebellion, of freedom, and of lives lived on the very edge of the known world. Tonight, we journey to a time when the vast, unpredictable ocean was both a highway and a refuge, a realm where the rules of landlocked society often dissolved into the turbulent waves. We seek not the grand narratives of empires, nor the clash of armies, but something more intimate, more profoundly human, the stories of women who defied expectation, who dared to seize their own destiny amidst the creaking timbers and salt-laced air of pirate ships. Imagine for a moment the world of the 17th and 18th centuries, a world vastly different from our own, yet one where the currents of human ambition, oppression, and yearning ran just as strong. For women especially, life was often a tapestry woven with threads of strict societal expectation. Their roles were largely confined to the domestic sphere, their voices often muted, their destinies frequently determined by the men in their lives. Marriage was a cornerstone, motherhood a duty, and property rights a distant dream for many. To step outside these boundaries was not merely unconventional, it was often an act of profound defiance, punishable by social ostracization, poverty, or worse. Yet, even within these rigid frameworks, the human spirit, with its boundless capacity for courage and ingenuity, found ways to bend, to break, and sometimes to soar. The sea, that boundless expanse of mystery and danger, offered a tantalizing, albeit perilous, alternative. For some, it was a path to commerce, to exploration, to new horizons. For others, it became a stage for daring acts of piracy, a brutal, desperate, yet strangely alluring existence that promised riches, freedom, and a fierce independence from the suffocating grip of land-based authority. When we speak of pirates, our minds often conjure images of swashbuckling men, of bearded captains with cutlasses and eye patches, their exploits etched into the popular imagination. But what of the women? Were they merely shadows, hidden figures in the background of these tumultuous lives? History, in its often biased recounting, has tended to overlook or diminish their contributions. The narratives have been dominated by male voices, male perspectives, and male adventurers. Yet, if we listen closely, if we delve into the faded logs, the terse court records, and the scattered eyewitness accounts, we find traces of extraordinary women who not only sailed alongside men, but often commanded them, fought alongside them, and in some cases surpassed them in their audacity and skill. These were not women who fit neatly into the societal molds of their time. They were women who, for a myriad of reasons, poverty, abuse, a thirst for adventure, a refusal to be constrained, chose a life that was both exhilarating and fraught with peril. They donned male attire, mastered the art of navigation, wielded weapons with deadly precision, and faced down the might of empires. Their stories are not just tales of adventure, they are profound commentaries on gender roles, on societal constraints, on the allure of freedom, and on the brutal realities of survival in a world that offered little quarter. Tonight, we will embark on a journey across the choppy waters of history, guided by the faintest glimmers of evidence, to illuminate the lives of 10 remarkable women. Their names, perhaps, are not as readily recalled as Blackbeard or Captain Kidd, but their impact, their courage, and their enduring spirit deserve to be remembered. We will explore not just what they did, but why they did it, and how their individual struggles and triumphs reflected the broader currents of their age. From the windswept shores of Ireland to the bustling ports of the Caribbean, from the frozen seas of the north to the sun-drenched waters of the South China Sea, these women carved out their own legends, leaving behind a legacy that continues to resonate with themes of defiance, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of self-determination. Let us now cast off from the familiar shores of the present and drift slowly into the past, into a world where the horizon promised both danger and untold possibility, and where the echoes of these extraordinary female pirates still whisper across the waves. 1. Anne Bonny and Mary Red. The Caribbean's unconventional scourges. Our journey begins in the golden age of piracy, a tumultuous period spanning roughly from the late 17th to the early 18th centuries, primarily concentrated in the Caribbean Sea. This was a time of vast colonial expansion, intense maritime trade, and fierce rivalries between European powers. The wealth of the New World, particularly the silver and gold flowing from Spanish colonies, created irresistible targets for opportunistic pirates. It was amidst this vibrant, volatile backdrop that two of the most famous female pirates, Anne Bonny and Mary Read, emerged from the shadows to leave an indelible mark on history. Their stories are intrinsically linked, bound by fate, by a shared life of deception, and ultimately by their capture alongside the notorious pirate captain, John Rackham, better known as Calico Jack. Let us first turn our attention to Anne Bonny, born Anne Cormac around 1700 in Kinsale, County Cork, Ireland. Her early life was far from ordinary. She was the illegitimate daughter of an attorney, William Cormac, and his servant, Mary Brennan. This scandalous birth, a social stain in the rigid society of the time, forced her father to abandon his practice and emigrate with Anne and her mother to Charlestown, modern-day Charleston, South Carolina, hoping to escape the gossip and rebuild his life as a planter, and grew up with a fiery temperament, a characteristic that would define her later years. Accounts from the time, though, often embellished by sensationalist writers, speak of her strong will and physical prowess, even from a young age. She reportedly had a violent temper, once assaulting a serving girl with a knife. Her father, despite his initial efforts, struggled to control her independent spirit. Anne's rebellious nature reached a zenith when she married a penniless sailor named James Bonny, much to her father's disapproval. This act of defiance led to her disinheritance, seeking a new life, or perhaps simply following the tides of opportunity. Anne and James sailed to Nassau, on the island of New Providence in the Bahamas. Nassau, at this time, was a notorious haven for pirates, a lawless den where buccaneers could carouse, resupply, and recruit new hands. It was here, in this vibrant, dangerous crucible, that Anne's path diverged irrevocably. James Bonny, it seems, was not cut out for the pirate life, eventually becoming an informant for Governor Woodes Rogers, who was tasked with suppressing piracy in the region. This betrayal, coupled with Anne's undeniable attraction to the thrilling life of a buccaneer, led her into the orbit of John Rackham, Calico Jack, as he was known for his fondness for colourful calico clothing, was a relatively minor pirate captain, more opportunistic than truly formidable. Yet, he possessed a certain charm, and he recognized the spark of rebellion and courage in Anne. They became lovers, and Anne, abandoning her husband, joined Rackham's crew. This was an extraordinary step for a woman in that era. While some women might have been aboard pirate ships as captives or camp followers, to actively join as a crew member, to engage in the bloody business of piracy, was almost unheard of. To do so, Anne often disguised herself as a man, a common tactic for women seeking to operate in male-dominated professions or dangerous environments. It was on Rackham's ship, the Revenge, that Anne Bonny met Mary Read. Mary's story is, if anything, even more remarkable in its narrative of sustained deception and a lifelong struggle for agency. Mary Read was born in England, likely in the late 17th century, the illegitimate daughter of a sea captain's wife. To conceal her true identity and secure an inheritance meant for a deceased legitimate son, Mary's mother began raising her as a boy, dressing her in male attire from an early age. This deception became a way of life. Mary continued to live as a male throughout her youth, finding employment first as a footboy, then as a sailor, and later, quite astonishingly, as a soldier in the British Army. She fought with distinction in the War of the Spanish Succession, earning a reputation for bravery. It was during her time as a soldier that she fell in love with a Flemish cavalryman, revealing her true gender to him. They married, and for a brief period, Mary lived openly as a woman, running an inn in Holland. However, her husband's untimely death shattered this period of domesticity. Heartbroken and destitute, Mary, once again, donned male clothing and returned to the sea, seeking passage to the West Indies. Her ship was eventually captured by pirates, and rather than resisting, Mary, embracing the life she had been forced into, decided to join the pirate crew. Accounts vary on whether she willingly joined or was compelled, but soon she was an active participant in their raids. It was on Rackham's ship, after he captured the vessel Mary was on, that the two remarkable women met. The initial encounters between Anne and Mary are shrouded in legend. Some accounts suggest Anne was initially attracted to Mary, believing her to be a handsome young man, until Mary revealed her true identity. Regardless of the exact circumstances, a strong bond of friendship, respect, and shared purpose quickly formed between them. Both women were fierce fighters, unafraid of battle, and by all accounts, more courageous than many of the men on board. They often fought side by side, cutlass in hand, pistols blazing, during the harrowing attacks on merchant vessels. Their exploits with Calico Jack were not grand or world-altering, but they were sufficient to attract the attention of Governor Rogers. In October 1720, a pirate hunter in the employ of the governor, Captain Jonathan Barnett, located Rackham's ship near Negro Point, Jamaica. The pirates, many of them heavily intoxicated, were caught largely unawares. What followed became the defining moment of Anne and Mary's piratical careers. As Barnett's forces boarded the Revenge, most of the male crew members, including Calico Jack, retreated below deck, cowering in fear. It was Anne Bonny and Mary Read who stood on deck, fighting ferociously, cursing their male shipmates for their cowardice. Legend has it that Anne, in a fit of rage, confronted Rackham, shouting, "If you had fought like a man, you need not be hanged like a dog." Despite their desperate courage, they were eventually overwhelmed and captured. All the pirates, including Bonny, Read, and Rackham, were taken to Spanish Town, Jamaica, to stand trial for piracy. The trials were swift, and the sentences predictable: death by hanging. John Rackham and his male crew were summarily executed. However, when it came time for Anne Bonny and Mary Read to face their fate, they each pleaded their bellies, a legal term meaning they claimed to be pregnant. Under English common law, a pregnant woman could not be executed until after she had given birth. This plea granted them a temporary reprieve. Mary Read, unfortunately, did not survive long after her trial. She died in prison, likely from a fever contracted during childbirth or from complications related to it, in April 1721. Her burial record in St. Catherine's Parish, Jamaica, confirms her death, and Bonny's fate is more mysterious. She disappears from the historical record after her reprieve. There are several theories. Some suggest her wealthy father may have paid a ransom for her release, allowing her to live out her days under a new identity. Others believe she might have died in prison like Mary, or that she was eventually executed once her child was born. The truth remains elusive, adding to the mystique of her daring life. The stories of Anne Bonny and Mary Read resonate far beyond their individual exploits. They represent a powerful challenge to the rigid gender roles of their era. They were women who refused to be confined, who embraced a dangerous, unconventional life, and who demonstrated a fierce bravery that often surpassed their male counterparts. Their choice of piracy, while undeniably brutal and criminal, can also be viewed as an extreme form of self-liberation, a desperate bid for autonomy in a world that offered them little. Their legacy lives on, a testament to the enduring human desire for freedom, and a quiet reminder that courage knows no gender. 2. Grace O'Malley, the pirate queen of Connaught. As we navigate the choppy waters of history, our compass now points north, away from the sun-drenched Caribbean and towards the rugged, mist-shrouded coasts of 16th century Ireland. Here, amidst the swirling politics of Gaelic clans and the encroaching power of the English crown, we encounter a woman of extraordinary will and strategic genius, Grace O'Malley, or Granuaile, as she is known in Irish folklore. Her life, spanning much of the Elizabethan era, was not merely that of a pirate, but of a chieftain, a shrewd politician, and a formidable warrior who challenged the very foundations of English authority in Ireland. To understand Grace, we must first grasp the complex tapestry of her world. The 16th century in Ireland was a period of profound upheaval. English influence, steadily growing since the Norman invasions, was reaching a new intensity under Queen Elizabeth I. The English aimed to subjugate the independent Gaelic lordships, impose English law, and secure control of the island. This era saw constant skirmishes, land confiscations, and a fierce resistance from the native Irish, who clung to their ancient customs, language, and territorial rights. In the western province of Connaught, where the land meets the wild Atlantic, the O'Malley clan held sway. They were a seafaring people, their fortunes tied to the sea, and their very existence dependent on their maritime skills. They were known as Lords of the Sea, their galleys patrolling the intricate coastline, engaging in fishing, trading, and, crucially, a form of legitimate coastal raiding or piracy that was often indistinguishable from warfare in the eyes of the English, but viewed as justifiable enterprise by the Gaelic clans. Grace O'Malley was born around 1530 into this powerful O'Malley chieftain family. Her father, Owen de Blara O'Malley, was the chief, and Grace, from an early age, demonstrated an independent spirit that defied the traditional roles for women of her time. Legend has it that as a young girl, wishing to join her father on a voyage, she was told her long hair would be a hindrance. In a defiant act, she cut it short, earning her the nickname Grain Mao Granule, meaning bald Grace. Whether true or not, the story perfectly captures her unwavering determination. Grace was educated, learning Latin, and developing a keen understanding of politics and strategy, skills rarely afforded to women, even within chieftain families. Upon her father's death, she defied custom by taking over the leadership of the O'Malley fleet, a role traditionally passed down to a male heir. This was an unprecedented move, cementing her early reputation as a woman of formidable influence. Her life was a complex weave of personal ambition, clan loyalty, and political maneuvering. She first married Donal and co-guide O'Flaherty, Donal of the Battles, another chieftain of a neighbouring clan. This marriage, though arranged, produced several children and solidified her power base. She managed Donal's castle, Bunowen, and continued to command her own fleet. After Donal's death, she moved to Clew Bay, establishing her stronghold on Clare Island and at Rockfleet Castle, which became the nerve centre of her maritime operations. Grace's piracy was not indiscriminate. It was a strategic tool, an extension of her clan's power and a means of survival. She targeted English shipping and vessels belonging to rival clans, extracting tolls, seizing goods, and disrupting trade routes. This was not merely for personal gain. It was a form of economic warfare, a means of asserting her clan's independence and resisting English encroachment. She developed a reputation as a fierce and effective leader, respected by her followers and feared by her enemies. She was known to be present on her galleys during engagements, her presence inspiring her crew. Her second significant marriage was to Richard Burke. Richard and Iron Richard, another powerful chieftain. This was a marriage of political convenience, uniting two formidable families. The legend surrounding their divorce is particularly telling. After a year, Grace is said to have locked Richard out of Rockfleet Castle and shouted, "Richard Burke, I dismiss you," under the old Brehon law, thereby dissolving the marriage and retaining control of the castle. This act, whether entirely accurate or partially mythologized, highlights her audacious spirit and her mastery of legal loopholes. As the 16th century drew to a close, English pressure on Ireland intensified. Sir Richard Bingham, the ruthless English governor of Connaught, viewed Grace O'Malley as a dangerous rebel and a pirate. He systematically hunted down her family members, seized her lands, and imprisoned her son, Tibbot Burke. This marked a turning point for Grace, facing the destruction of her clan and the loss of her legacy. She made a decision of extraordinary courage and strategic brilliance. She sought an audience with Queen Elizabeth I herself. In 1593, Grace O'Malley, an aging Irish chieftain and pirate queen, sailed to London and, in a truly remarkable encounter, met with Queen Elizabeth I at Greenwich Palace. This was a meeting of two formidable women, each a powerful ruler in her own right, accustomed to commanding loyalty and wielding authority. The details of their meeting are steeped in legend, but historical accounts confirm its occurrence. Grace reportedly refused to bow, seeing herself as a sovereign ruler. They communicated in Latin, the common language of educated elites. The conversation between these two queens, the monarch of England and the chieftain of Connaught, must have been a fascinating interplay of power, negotiation, and perhaps a grudging respect. Grace laid out her grievances, explaining the injustices inflicted by Bingham and seeking the release of her son and the restoration of her lands. Elizabeth, ever the pragmatist, recognized Grace's influence and the potential for a peaceful resolution, rather than continued conflict in Connaught. Remarkably, the meeting was a success. Elizabeth agreed to Grace's terms. Her son was released, her lands were returned, and Bingham was somewhat curtailed. In return, Grace agreed to cease her piratical activities against English shipping and to support the crown. This was not a surrender, but a negotiation between equals, a testament to Grace's diplomatic skill and Elizabeth's strategic foresight. Grace O'Malley lived out her remaining years in relative peace, dying around 1603, the same year as Queen Elizabeth. Her legacy is multifaceted. She was a woman who transcended the gender norms of her time, not just by leading a fleet but by negotiating directly with a powerful monarch. Her piracy was deeply entwined with her role as a clan leader, a means of defending her people and their way of life against overwhelming imperial power. She was a master of the sea, a shrewd politician, and a fierce protector of her lineage. Grace O'Malley remains a towering figure in Irish history, a symbol of resilience, defiance, and the enduring spirit of independence against impossible odds. Her story whispers across the centuries, a reminder that the lines between pirate, chieftain, and national hero can often blur in the rich tapestry of the past. 3. Jean de Clisson, the Lioness of Brittany and the Black Fleet. From the wild coasts of Ireland, we now journey southeast, across the English Channel, to the rugged, maritime Duchy of Brittany in the 14th century. This was an age of feudal loyalties, chivalric ideals, and brutal warfare. Europe was in the throes of the 100 Years' War, a protracted and devastating conflict between England and France, and Brittany, strategically positioned between the two great powers, found itself a crucial battleground, caught in a bitter succession dispute known as the War of the Breton Succession, 1364. It is within this crucible of dynastic ambition and betrayal that we discover the harrowing and vengeful tale of Jean de Clisson, often called the Lioness of Brittany, whose acts of piracy were born not of greed, but of an unimaginable grief and a burning thirst for vengeance. Jean-Louise de Belleville, born around 1300 into a powerful noble family in Poitou, was no stranger to the political machinations of her time. She came from a lineage of proud, independent lords. Her early life, though privileged, was undoubtedly shaped by the violent landscape of medieval France. She was married 3 times, each union solidifying her family's wealth and influence. Her third marriage, in 1330, was to Olivier Fort de Clisson, a prominent Breton nobleman and a close ally of Charles de Blois, one of the claimants to the Duchy of Brittany. The War of the Breton Succession was a proxy war for the larger conflict between England and France. John de Montfort, supported by the English, and Charles de Blois, supported by the French, vied for control of the duchy. Olivier de Clisson, initially a staunch supporter of Charles de Blois, was a respected knight and a significant military asset. However, in 1343, a pivotal and tragic event occurred that would irrevocably alter Jean's life and set her on a dark, vengeful path. During a truce in the Breton War, Olivier de Clisson was invited to a tournament organized by the French King Philip VI. While participating, he was suddenly arrested on suspicion of treason, specifically of secretly siding with the English. The accusations were likely fabricated, a cynical ploy by Philip VI to eliminate a powerful Breton lord he mistrusted and perhaps to seize his wealth. Without a proper trial, Olivier de Clisson was quickly condemned and publicly beheaded in Paris on August 2, 1343. His head was then reportedly displayed on a pike in Nantes. The swift, brutal, and unjust execution of her husband shattered Jean. It was not merely an act of political violence. It was a profound personal betrayal. She viewed King Philip VI as a murderer, a man who had summarily executed her husband, dishonored her family, and left her and her children destitute. The grief she felt was immense, but it quickly hardened into a resolve for retribution. From that moment, Jean de Clisson swore a solemn oath to avenge Olivier's death, and her vengeance would take a unique and terrifying form. Jean, a woman of considerable intelligence and determination, understood that she could not challenge the King of France on land. Her power lay elsewhere. She sold her lands and possessions, raising a substantial sum of money. With these funds, she purchased 3 warships and had them painted entirely black, with blood-red sails, earning them the ominous moniker, the Black Fleet. These were not ordinary vessels. They were designed for speed and surprise, equipped for ruthless attacks from 1343 onwards. For over a decade, Jean de Clisson transformed herself into a formidable pirate queen. Her targets were specific: French merchant ships, particularly those belonging to the king or French nobles. Her acts were not random banditry. They were calculated strikes aimed at inflicting maximum damage and terror on the French crown and its allies. Her modus operandi was brutal and uncompromising. When she captured a French vessel, she would reportedly execute the entire crew, sparing only 1 or 2 sailors to tell the horrifying tale of the Lioness of Brittany and her Black Fleet. This ruthlessness earned her a fearsome reputation and sent shivers down the spines of French mariners. She personally led many of the raids, demonstrating a martial prowess and a chilling resolve that belied her aristocratic background. Jean's piracy was more than just a means of revenge. It was also a strategic move in the ongoing Breton succession war. By harassing French shipping, she disrupted supply lines, diverted resources, and supported the English-backed John de Montfort faction. She effectively became an independent naval force, a corsair operating with a singular, unwavering purpose. Her most famous acts of piracy took place in the English Channel, a vital waterway for French trade. She harried vessels, captured valuable cargoes, and ensured that the memory of Olivier de Clisson's unjust death would haunt the French court. Her children, particularly her son Olivier V, who would later become a prominent constable of France, were often with her, growing up amidst the grim reality of their mother's vengeful crusade. The exact end of Jean de Clisson's piratical career is not entirely clear, but by the mid-1350s, as the Hundred Years' War continued to rage, her direct actions as a pirate seem to have ceased. It is believed she eventually found refuge in England and later returned to Brittany, marrying her fourth husband, an English nobleman, Walter Benton. She died around 1359, having seen her son Olivier de Clisson rise to prominence in the French military, ultimately becoming a powerful figure, perhaps fulfilling a different kind of vengeance for his mother. Jean de Clisson's story is a chilling testament to the transformative power of grief and the lengths to which an individual, particularly a wronged woman in a brutal age, might go to seek justice. Her piracy was not driven by a simple desire for wealth or adventure, but by an unyielding commitment to avenge a profound wrong. She was a woman of noble birth who descended into a life of brutal maritime warfare, driven by a code of honor that transcended the prevailing laws. She harnessed the sea as her weapon, and her black fleet became a symbol of retribution, a haunting reminder that even in an age dominated by men, a woman's fury, when unleashed, could be a force of terrifying and unforgettable power. Her legend echoes as a dark yet compelling chapter in the maritime history of medieval Europe. 4. Saïnida Ehira, the Pirate Queen of Tétouan. Our historical journey now shifts dramatically, across continents and cultures, to the shimmering waters of the Mediterranean in the early 16th century. We travel to the vibrant, complex world of North Africa, a crossroads of empires, religions, and trade routes. Here, in the coastal city of Tétouan, Morocco, a figure of immense power and influence emerged, Saïnida Ehira, a name that translates to the free woman or the noble lady. She was not merely a pirate. She was a queen, a governor, a formidable diplomat, and a strategic genius who controlled one of the most significant corsairing fleets of her time. Her story is deeply intertwined with the geopolitical landscape of the Iberian Reconquista and the rise of the Ottoman Empire. To understand Saïnida Ehira, we must first immerse ourselves in the historical context of her birth and rise to power. She was born Lala Aisha bint Ali ibn Rashid al-Alami, likely around 1485, in the Nasrid Kingdom of Granada, the last Muslim stronghold in Andalus Islamic Spain. Her family, the Banu Rashid, were prominent and noble Andalusian Muslims. However, this world was rapidly collapsing. In 1492, Granada fell to the Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, marking the completion of the Reconquista, the centuries-long Christian reconquest of the Iberian Peninsula. The fall of Granada led to the mass expulsion and forced conversion of Muslims and Jews from Spain. Saïnida Ehira's family, along with tens of thousands of others, became Moriscos or Mudjars refugees who fled across the Strait of Gibraltar to North Africa, seeking refuge in the established Muslim states, particularly in Morocco. Her family settled in Chefchaouen, a town founded by her father, Moulay Ali ibn Rashid, as a haven for Andalusian exiles. Growing up amidst this community of displaced, often bitter, and resilient refugees profoundly shaped Saïnida Ehira. She was educated in Islamic law, mathematics, and even strategy, a testament to her family's aristocratic background and progressive outlook. Her intelligence and ambition were evident from a young age. Her political career began with an arranged marriage to Abu Hassan Mandri Gomri, the powerful governor of Tétouan, a vital port city established by her father's family. Upon her husband's death in 1515, Sayyid-e-Hira, rather than stepping aside for a male successor, assumed full control as the governor of Tetuan. This was an extraordinary feat for a woman in any society of that era, let alone in a politically turbulent region. Her authority was not merely symbolic. She directly administered the city, managed its finances, and crucially, controlled its burgeoning maritime activities. It is in this role that Sayyid-e-Hira embraced piracy, or more accurately, corsairing. Corsairing, unlike indiscriminate piracy, was often a state-sanctioned activity, a form of naval warfare and economic retaliation. For Sayyid-e-Hira and the inhabitants of Tetuan, it was a vital lifeline and a powerful tool of revenge against the Spanish and Portuguese, who continued to persecute Muslims in Iberia and engage in aggressive expansion in North Africa. Her fleet, operating out of Tetuan, targeted Spanish and Portuguese shipping in the Strait of Gibraltar and across the Mediterranean. These attacks were not just about plunder. They were about striking back at the Christian powers that had dispossessed her people. The wealth acquired from these raids was used to fund Tetuan's defenses, enrich the city, and support the community of Andalusian exiles. Sayyid-e-Hira understood that control of the seas was essential for the survival and prosperity of her city. She formed alliances with other corsair captains, most notably the legendary Ottoman Admiral Barbarossa Hayreddin Pasha, who controlled Algiers and was a major force in the Ottoman-Habsburg rivalry in the Mediterranean. This alliance cemented her influence and provided mutual support against their common European enemies. Sayyid-e-Hira's power grew to such an extent that she was widely recognized as the undisputed Queen of the Mediterranean pirates. European diplomats, including those from Spain and Portugal, were forced to negotiate with her for the release of their captured citizens and for safe passage for their ships. She held considerable sway over trade routes and was a formidable force to be reckoned with. Her governance of Tetuan was firm, but just, and she was known for her astute political judgment. In a move that further cemented her status and influence, Sayyid-e-Hira married the Sultan of Morocco, Anne Bonny, in 1541. This was a unique marriage. For the first and only time in Moroccan history, the Sultan travelled from his capital in Fez to Tetuan to marry her, a testament to her power and her refusal to leave her domain. She remained the de facto ruler of Tetuan, maintaining her independence. Even within this powerful union, Sayyid-e-Hira's reign, however, eventually faced challenges. The political landscape of Morocco was shifting, and rival factions began to emerge. In 1542, after approximately 30 years of ruling Tetuan, she was overthrown by her son-in-law, who resented her power and perhaps sought to consolidate his own. She retired from public life, and her ultimate fate remains somewhat obscure, though it is believed she lived out her remaining years in Chefchaouen, the city of her family's refuge. Sayyid-e-Hira's story is far more than that of a pirate. It is the narrative of a refugee who rose to become a sovereign ruler, a woman who wielded immense power in a male-dominated world, and a leader who used the sea as a tool for political vengeance and economic survival for her people. Her piracy was an act of resistance, a strategic response to the injustices inflicted upon her family and her community. She stands as a remarkable figure of agency and authority, a testament to the fact that even in the most tumultuous times, individuals can forge their own destinies and leave an indelible mark on history, shaping their world with courage, cunning, and an unyielding will. Her reign in Tetuan remains a powerful symbol of an era when Muslim women commanded respect and authority on the world stage. 5. Ching Shih, the indomitable commander of the Red Flag Fleet. Our final journey takes us to the vast, intricate waterways of the South China Sea in the early 19th century, a realm of bustling trade, ancient traditions, and rampant piracy. This is the domain of Ching Shih, a woman whose name, perhaps more than any other, epitomizes the sheer scale and power a female pirate could achieve. She was not merely a captain, she was the undisputed commander of the legendary Red Flag Fleet, a confederation of pirates so vast and so formidable that it challenged the might of the Qing dynasty, the British Empire, and the Portuguese navies. Her story is an extraordinary testament to leadership, strategy, and survival against overwhelming odds. The early 19th century in China was a period of internal unrest and increasing external pressure from European powers. The Qing dynasty, while still nominally powerful, was struggling with internal rebellions, corruption, and the growing opium trade. The coastal regions, particularly the waters around Guangdong province, were rife with piracy. This was not the romanticized piracy of the Caribbean. It was a brutal, organized enterprise, often involving thousands of men and hundreds of ships, preying on the rich maritime trade that flowed through the region. Ching Shih, born Shih Yang, likely around 1775, had humble and difficult beginnings. She was a Cantonese prostitute working in a floating brothel in Canton Guangzhou. Her entry into the world of piracy came through her marriage in 1801 to Ching Shih, a renowned and powerful pirate captain who commanded a significant fleet. This was not a marriage of love in the conventional sense, but a strategic alliance. It is said that Shih Yang negotiated her terms of marriage, insisting on an equal share in his piratical enterprise. This early demonstration of her shrewdness hints at the formidable leader she would become. Ching Shih was a brilliant pirate strategist, known for uniting various independent pirate factions into a loose confederation known as the Red Flag Fleet. This alliance, based on shared plunder and a common code, brought a semblance of order and immense power to the fragmented pirate world. However, in 1807, Ching Shih tragically died at sea during a storm. His death presented a critical juncture. For the Red Flag Fleet, pirate confederations were often fragile, held together by the charisma and power of their leader. Without Ching Shih, the alliance risked disintegrating into infighting. It was at this moment that Ching Shih, with remarkable cunning and decisive action, stepped forward to claim command. She did not seize power through brute force. Instead, she leveraged her influence within the fleet and, crucially, formed an alliance with Ching Shih's adopted son and protege, Ching Shih. Some accounts suggest they became lovers and eventually married, solidifying their power. By integrating her political acumen with Ching Shih's military prowess and the loyalty he commanded from a significant portion of the fleet, Ching Shih successfully consolidated her authority. She proved to be an even more astute leader than her deceased husband. Under Ching Shih's command, the Red Flag Fleet reached its zenith. It grew to an astonishing size, estimated to comprise over 1,800 ships and between 70,000 to 80,000 pirates, including men, women, and children. This was not merely a collection of individual ships. It was a highly organized and disciplined naval force. Ching Shih implemented a strict code of conduct for her pirates, a three-point law that instilled order and efficiency. This code included rules regarding the distribution of plunder. The treatment of female captives' sexual assault was punishable by death, and severe penalties for desertion or disobedience. These rules, enforced with ruthless efficiency, transformed a disparate band of outlaws into a cohesive fighting machine. The Red Flag Fleet dominated the waters of the South China Sea. They levied taxes on coastal villages, controlled trade routes, and engaged in large-scale raids on merchant ships, extracting immense wealth. Their power was so pervasive that even government officials and local warlords were forced to pay them protection money. They even attacked coastal towns and cities, their presence a constant threat to the Qing dynasty. The Chinese Imperial Navy, despite numerous attempts, proved utterly incapable of defeating Ching Shih. Her fleet's superior numbers, their intimate knowledge of the labyrinthine coastal waters, and her strategic brilliance consistently outmaneuvered and overwhelmed imperial forces. In 1809, the Qing dynasty, desperate to quell the piracy, formed an unprecedented alliance with the British and Portuguese navies. Even this combined force, armed with superior weaponry, struggled to defeat the Red Flag Fleet. Ching Shih's tactics, her ability to deploy her forces, and the unwavering loyalty of her crews were legendary. After years of relentless warfare and frustration, the Qing government, realizing they could not defeat Ching Shih by force, offered an amnesty to all pirates in 1810. This was a remarkable concession, a tacit admission of their inability to crush the Red Flag Fleet. Ching Shih, ever the pragmatist, recognized the opportunity. Negotiations were complex and protracted. She personally led the discussions, demonstrating her diplomatic skills. She refused to simply surrender. She demanded an honorable peace and protection for her pirates. In the end, Ching Shih negotiated an incredibly favorable deal. She and her forces were allowed to retain their plunder. Her husband, Ching Shih, was granted a high-ranking position in the Imperial Navy, and she herself was granted a full pardon and allowed to live out her life peacefully in Canton. She accepted the amnesty in 1810, bringing an end to one of the most remarkable piratical careers in history. Ching Shih, the former prostitute, retired from piracy a wealthy and respected woman. She ran a successful gambling house and sword smuggling business in Canton, living a long life until her death in 1844. At the age of 69, her story is a monumental testament to female leadership and strategic genius. In a patriarchal society, she rose from the lowest rung to command tens of thousands of men, outmaneuver powerful empires, and negotiate terms of peace on her own terms. Her success was not due to brute strength, but to her extraordinary intelligence, her organizational skills, her ability to inspire loyalty, and her unwavering resolve. Ching Shih redefined what was possible for a woman in her era, leaving behind a legacy that continues to inspire awe and fascination. She stands as the epitome of the female pirate, a historical force who bent the world to her will, a true queen of the pirates. 6. Jacques de la Haye, the red-haired Caribbean avenger. Our voyage through the annals of female piracy now returns to the sun-drenched, perilous waters of the 17th century Caribbean, a time when European powers fiercely contested colonial dominance, and the lines between privateer, buccaneer, and outright pirate were often blurred. In this chaotic tapestry of shifting alliances and brutal ambition, a captivating and fearsome figure emerged, Jacques de la Haye, a legendary French buccaneer whose story is steeped in tragedy, vengeance, and a fierce, almost mythical beauty. The 17th century in the Caribbean was a crucible of conflict. Spain, though weakened, still held vast colonial possessions, but England, France, and the Netherlands were rapidly expanding their own empires, establishing sugar plantations and vital trade routes. This created an ideal environment for buccaneers. Rough, independent seafarers, often former indentured servants or escaped slaves, who preyed on Spanish shipping, sometimes with the tacit or even explicit approval of European powers who saw them as a cheap way to harass their rivals. Tortuga, a small island of the coast of Hispaniola, became the infamous haven for these buccaneers, a lawless frontier town where fortunes were made and last, and lives were lived on the razor's edge. Jacques de la Haye's story, while rich in detail, is drawn from historical accounts that mix fact with legend, a common occurrence for figures who operated on the fringes of official records. The primary source for her tale comes from a 17th century French historian of the West Indies, Alexandre Esquemulin, in his influential book Buccaneers of America, published in 1678. While Esquemelin's accounts are often dramatic, they provide the most comprehensive, albeit sometimes embellished, glimpse into the lives of these Caribbean adventurers. Jacques de la Haye was reportedly born in Haiti, then Saint-Domingue, a French colony, sometime in the mid-17th century. Her origins are tragic. Her mother, according to Esquemelin, died giving birth to her, and her father, a French immigrant, was murdered by Spanish soldiers, leaving Jacques to care for her mentally disabled brother. This profound personal loss and early exposure to violence and injustice would deeply shape her path. The Spanish, who frequently raided French settlements and vice versa, was seen as the ultimate enemy, responsible for the destruction of her family, destitute and with a dependent brother. Jacques, a young woman in a brutal world, had few options. Survival dictated a path outside conventional society. She turned to piracy, not out of a thirst for gold alone, but driven by a burning desire for revenge against the Spanish and a need to secure a future for herself and her brother. Jacques quickly gained a fearsome reputation. She was described as having striking red hair, a feature that earned her the moniker Back from the Dead Red due to a particularly dramatic incident. According to the legend, to escape capture, she once feigned her own death and spent years living as a man, adopting a new identity, before reappearing to resume her piratical career. This act of cunning and resilience further cemented her legend among the buccaneers. Her style of leadership was marked by exceptional bravery and a fierce determination. Unlike many pirates who were solely focused on plunder, Jacques often engaged in direct combat with Spanish forces, her attacks serving as both economic raids and acts of retribution. She was known to be a skilled fighter, wielding her weapons with efficiency and fearlessness. Her crew, drawn from the hardened ranks of buccaneers, respected her courage and her unwavering commitment. One of the most dramatic stories associated with Chicot involves her capture of a Spanish galleon laden with treasure. This particular feat, combined with her earlier resurrection, elevated her to a legendary status among the buccaneers of Tortuga. She was not merely a captain, she was a symbol of defiance against Spanish tyranny and a testament to the idea that even the most vulnerable could rise to challenge their oppressors. The exact details of Jacquot de la Haye's demise are as shrouded in mystery as her early life. Exquemelin mentions that she eventually died in battle, fighting fiercely, as was her nature. The lack of precise dates and locations for her end only adds to her mythic stature. She simply disappeared into the mists of history, her legend growing. With each retelling, Jacquot de la Haye's story, whether entirely factual or partly embellished by the chroniclers of the time, offers a powerful glimpse into the desperate lives of women forced to carve out their own destinies in a brutal age. Her piracy was a direct response to personal tragedy and systemic injustice. She represents the archetype of the avenging pirate, a woman driven by a profound sense of loss to reclaim agency and exact retribution. Her red hair, her legendary return from the dead, and her unwavering focus on Spanish targets all contribute to a narrative that transcends mere criminality. Jacquot de la Haye stands as a compelling figure of resilience, a woman who, in the face of immense adversity, chose the perilous path of a pirate to fight for her own survival and to honor the memory of those she had lost. Her whispers on the wind tell of a forgotten rage, still echoing through the palm-fringed coves of the Caribbean. 7. Sadie Farrell, the more cutpurse of the waterfront, leaving the distant shores of historical legend. Our focus now shifts to a more recent, yet equally vibrant, period of maritime lawlessness, the bustling, grimy waterfronts of 19th century. New York City. This was an era of burgeoning industrialization, massive immigration, and stark social divides. The docks of Manhattan were a pulsating artery of commerce, but also a breeding ground for crime, vice, and desperation. It is in this urban jungle that we find the curious and often contradictory figure of Sadie Farrell, known as Sadie the Goat, a woman who, while not commanding a grand pirate fleet on the high seas, nonetheless carved out a unique and unforgettable niche as a notorious waterfront pirate and gang leader. Her story reflects a different kind of piracy, one born of urban poverty, opportunism, and the war struggle for survival in a rapidly modernizing world. The 19th century in American cities, particularly New York, was a time of immense social change. The Five Points neighborhood, the Bowery, and the waterfront districts were characterized by extreme poverty, overcrowded tenements, and a pervasive presence of street gangs. Law enforcement was often corrupt and overwhelmed, leading to a flourishing underworld of criminals, from pickpockets and burglars and more organized syndicates. Women, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds, had limited avenues for economic independence and often found themselves pushed into illegal activities to survive. Sadie Farrell's exact birth date is unknown, but she was active in the latter half of the 19th century. Her nickname, Sadie the Goat, is believed to have derived from her pugnacious nature and a rumored penchant for head-butting her victims, much like a goat. Prior to her career as a waterfront pirate, Sadie was known as a formidable street tough and gang leader in the notorious Lower Manhattan districts. She reportedly led a gang of female pickpockets and muggers, terrorizing the unsuspecting on the docks and in the crowded streets. Her physical prowess and fearless attitude were well known, and she was not afraid to engage in brawls, often emerging victorious. What distinguishes Sadie Farrell and brings her into the realm of piracy is a specific period of her criminal career, believed to have occurred around the 1860s. According to local law and newspaper accounts, after a particularly violent street fight in which he was severely beaten by a male rival, Sadie allegedly gathered a gang of toughs, both male and female, and decided to abandon the streets for the water. Her ambition was to target the vulnerable barges and small boats that plied the Hudson River and New York Harbor. Her piratical operations were not grand, swashbuckling affairs on the high seas. Instead, they were focused on smaller, more opportunistic raids within the immediate vicinity of New York City. Sadie's gang would reportedly board barges and small merchant vessels, robbing them of their cargo and valuables. This was a crude but effective form of piracy, exploiting the lack of robust security on the bustling waterways. The most sensational, and perhaps most legendary, aspect of Sadie the Goat's waterfront escapades was her alleged kidnapping of children. for ransom. While details are murky and likely exaggerated by sensationalist press, it was claimed that she and her gang would abduct children playing near the docks, holding them for ransom from their often poor families. This particular accusation cemented her reputation as a truly ruthless figure in the criminal underworld. Sadie Farrell's pirate career on the water was relatively short-lived. The exact reasons for its cessation are not entirely clear, but the growing efforts of law enforcement and the inherent difficulties of sustaining such operations likely played a role. She eventually returned to her old haunts in the Five Points and Bowery, resuming her life as a gang leader and saloon keeper. Her later life was also marked by a fascinating twist. Stories suggest that she eventually became involved with a notorious male gang leader, likely in a relationship of convenience or alliance. The ultimate fate of Sadie the Goat is, like many figures of the era's underworld, somewhat uncertain, but she faded from the limelight as the 19th century drew to a close. Sadie Farrell's story offers a different perspective on female piracy. She was not a grand commander of fleets, nor was she driven by state-sanctioned corsairing. Her piracy was a raw, desperate response to the harsh realities of urban poverty and the allure of opportunistic crime. She operated in a world where survival often meant embracing violence and defying established norms. Her legend, though perhaps embellished, speaks to the adaptability and sheer tenacity of individuals, particularly women, who found unorthodox ways to assert power and secure resources in an unforgiving environment. Sadie the Goat stands as a uniquely American figure in the broader history of female piracy, a testament to the diverse forms that maritime lawlessness could take, even in the most unexpected of urban settings. Her echoes reverberate not on the high seas, but in the gritty, often forgotten tales of the city's underbelly. 8. Tutor of Illyria, the warrior queen of the Adriatic. We now cast our gaze back even further into the ancient world, to the rugged, indented coastlines of the Adriatic Sea in the 3rd century BC. This was a time of burgeoning empires, fierce tribal kingdoms, and intense maritime competition. The Roman Republic was rapidly expanding its influence, clashing with the established Hellenistic powers and the indigenous tribes of the Balkan Peninsula. It is in this dynamic and often brutal landscape that we encounter the formidable figure of Tutor, the Queen Regent of the Odia, an Illyrian tribe whose power and prosperity were inextricably linked to their mastery of the sea and their practice of piracy. Her story is one of a warrior queen who dared to challenge the nascent might of Rome itself. The Illyrians were a collection of ancient tribes inhabiting the Western Balkans, known for their martial prowess and their seafaring traditions. For centuries, their control of strategic coastal areas and islands allowed them to engage in widespread piracy, or, more accurately, maritime raiding, which was often viewed by them as a legitimate form of warfare and economic activity. They targeted the merchant ships of the Greeks and, increasingly, the Romans, who were expanding their trade networks across the Adriatic. Tutor's ascendancy to power began around 231 BCE, upon the death of her husband, King Agron. Agron had built the Odian kingdom into a formidable regional power, largely through the wealth generated by their successful piratical expeditions. With his death, Tutor became Queen Regent for her young stepson Pings. However, it quickly became clear that Tutor was far from a figurehead. She assumed effective control of the kingdom, demonstrating a fierce determination and a strategic vision that would define her reign. Under Tutor's command, the Illyrian piratical operations intensified dramatically. She actively encouraged and organized raids on Roman and Greek merchant ships, viewing these acts as a means of enriching her kingdom and asserting Illyrian dominance in the Adriatic. Her pirate fleets, highly skilled in navigating the intricate coastlines and numerous islands, became a severe threat to maritime trade. The Illyrian galleys, fast and agile, were perfectly suited for hit-and-run attacks, seizing cargo and holding prisoners for ransom. The scale of Illyrian piracy under Tutor became a major international issue. Greek city-states, whose trade was being severely disrupted, appealed to Rome for intervention. Rome, with its growing commercial interests in the Adriatic, could not ignore the threat. The Roman Senate initially attempted a diplomatic approach, sending envoys to Tutor in 229 BCE to demand a cessation of the piratical attacks and restitution for the damage inflicted. The encounter between the Roman envoys and Queen Tutor is a pivotal moment in her story, eloquently recounted by the ancient Greek historian Polybius. According to Polybius, Tutor was arrogant and dismissive of the Roman demands. She asserted that it was a custom for Illyrian kings to allow their subjects to engage in piracy, and that she had no intention of interfering with her people's lawful gains. When one of the envoys, Marcus Junius, reportedly responded with a stern warning about Rome's custom of punishing those who wronged them, Tutor, enraged by his insolence, allegedly had the envoy murdered on his return journey. This act of defiance, particularly the murder of a Roman ambassador, was an unforgivable offense in the eyes of Rome. It transformed a dispute over piracy into a direct declaration of war. The Roman Republic, known for its swift and decisive military responses, immediately mobilized a large expeditionary force. In 229 BCE, the First Illyrian War began. Rome launched a two-pronged invasion with a fleet of 200 ships and a significant land army. The conflict was a testament to Tutor's military capabilities, but ultimately, the sheer might and organizational power of Rome were too great to overcome. The Illyrians, despite their bravery and naval expertise, were outmatched. Tutor's forces suffered significant defeats, losing key strongholds and islands. By 228 BCE, facing overwhelming Roman pressure, Tutor was forced to sue for peace. The terms of the treaty were harsh. Tutor was compelled to pay tribute to Rome, to cease all piratical activities against Roman and their allies, and crucially, to withdraw her fleet from specific strategically important areas of the Adriatic, effectively limiting Illyrian naval power. She was also replaced as regent, or at least her direct authority was significantly curtailed, with Pins being established as the nominal ruler under Roman tutelage. The ultimate fate of Tutor is somewhat unclear. She seems to disappear from historical records after the peace treaty, likely living out her days in diminished circumstances. Some legends suggest she committed suicide by throwing herself into the sea, a dramatic end befitting her fierce spirit, but there is no historical confirmation of this. Tutor of Illyria stands as a fascinating and powerful figure in ancient history. She was a woman who, in a male-dominated world, assumed the mantle of leadership and challenged the rising superpower of her age. Her piracy was deeply embedded in the economic and cultural practices of her people, a form of resource acquisition and an assertion of their sovereignty. Her defiance of Rome, though ultimately unsuccessful, was an act of extraordinary courage and a testament to her unyielding will. She remains a symbol of resistance against imperial expansion and a remarkable example of a female ruler who wielded naval power and shaped the destiny of her kingdom, however briefly, through her command of the seas. Her story, preserved through the lens of Roman historians, reminds us that the narrative of piracy is often intertwined with the grander sweep of geopolitical ambition and the clash of civilizations. 9. Christina and her skit, the Swedish Baroness and Bandit. Our historical voyage now leads us to the colder, more desolate landscapes of 17th century Northern Europe, specifically to the Baltic Sea region. This was an era marked by the decline of Sweden's age of greatness, persistent internal struggles, and the ever-present threat of banditry and lawlessness on the fringes of society. It is here, amidst the icy winds and dense forests, that we encounter a lesser-known but intriguing figure, Christina Anna Skit, a Swedish baroness who, driven by circumstance and perhaps a thirst for adventure, embraced a life of highway robbery, and fleetingly, even a form of riverine piracy. Her story is a testament to the desperate measures individuals might take when born into a world of privilege that suddenly crumbles around them. Christina Anna Skit was born in 1643 into a prominent and aristocratic Swedish noble family. Her father, Baron Jacob Skit, was a senator, and her uncle was the renowned scholar and diplomat, Johann Skit. She grew up in a world of wealth, education, and social standing, far removed from the typical circumstances that might lead one to a life of crime. However, her family's fortunes took a dramatic turn due to her elder brother, Gustav Adolf Skit. Gustav Adolf, despite his noble birth, harbored a restless and dangerous spirit. He became involved in a criminal enterprise, leading a gang of bandits who engaged in highway robbery, targeting travelers and merchants on the roads of Sweden. These were not grand piratical exploits on the high seas, but rather terrestrial banditry, focused on ambushing and suspecting victims for their valuables. This was a precarious and illegal existence, entirely unbecoming of a baron. Christina Anna, still a young woman, became inextricably linked to her brother's criminal activities. Accounts suggest that she was not merely an unwitting accomplice, but actively participated in some of his gang's robberies. The exact extent of her involvement and her motivations are subject to some historical debate. Was she coerced by her brother, drawn in by the thrill, or driven by a shared sense of rebellion or financial desperation that might have afflicted the family despite their noble titles? The historical records, often terse and focused on legal proceedings, offer glimpses rather than full explanations. One of the most notable incidents involving Christina Anna and her brother's gang occurred in 1662. They boarded a Danish merchant ship in the Baltic Sea or one of Sweden's large lakes, perhaps the Maren. This specific act, though occurring on inland waters or the relatively enclosed Baltic, directly constitutes a form of piracy. The target was the valuable cargo of the ship, which they successfully plundered. This incident highlighted their audacity and willingness to extend their criminal enterprise from land to water. However, the life of a bandit, particularly one of noble birth, was inherently perilous. Gustav Adolf Skidt's criminal activities eventually caught the attention of the authorities, leading to a relentless pursuit. In 1663, he was captured and brought to trial. Under interrogation, he confessed to numerous robberies, including the attack on the Danish ship, and implicated his sister, Christina Anna, and her husband, Gustav Drake, who was also a known associate in the illicit ventures. The scandal was immense. A noble family, the senator's children, involved in common banditry and piracy, it sent shockwaves through Swedish society. Gustav Adolf Skidt was convicted and in 1663 executed for his crimes. His head was placed on a pike, a grim warning against such transgressions. Christina Anna Skidt and her husband, Gustav Drake, were also apprehended. While Drake was also convicted, Christina Anna's fate was more lenient due to her gender and perhaps her aristocratic connections. She was sentenced to death, but was eventually granted a royal pardon. This reprieve, however, did not free her entirely. She was instead banished, forced to live in exile in Pomerania, then a Swedish possession in Germany under a strict set of conditions, essentially a form of house arrest. Her husband, Gustav Drake, was not so fortunate and was executed. Christina Anna Skidt lived out the remainder of her life in relative obscurity in Pomerania, dying in 1677 at the age of 34. Her story, while not as grand or prolonged as those of other female pirates, is nonetheless compelling. It illustrates how the rigid class structures of the 17th century could be both a shield and a cage. Her noble birth offered some protection, but it also made her transgressions all the more shocking. Christina Anna Skidt's piracy was not about establishing a maritime empire or fighting for political freedom. It was a dark foray into criminality, perhaps born of a desperate need for resources, a longing for excitement, or simply a misguided loyalty to her rogue brother. She stands as a poignant reminder that the boundaries of gender and class could sometimes be breached, even if briefly and tragically, by individuals who found themselves on the wrong side of the law, navigating the treacherous waters of societal expectation and personal ambition. Her quiet fate in exile stands in stark contrast to the dramatic ends of her male counterparts, a silent echo of a life that veered sharply from its expected aristocratic path. 10. Rachel Wall, America's last female pirate. Our final journey brings us to the dawn of a new nation, to the young United States in the late 18th century, a time when the echoes of the American Revolution was still settling and maritime trade was burgeoning along the Atlantic coast. It is here, amidst the bustling ports and the unforgiving New England seas, that we encounter Rachel Wall, a figure whose brief but brutal piratical career and tragic end secured her a grim place in history as arguably America's last female pirate. Her story is one of desperation, deception, and a stark reminder of the harsh realities faced by those on the fringes of society. Born Rachel Schmidt, around 1760 in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, her early life was rooted in a devout Presbyterian family. However, the strictures of her upbringing seemed ill-suited to her restless spirit. At around 16 years old, she abandoned her home, drawn to the allure of the waterfront. It was there she met and soon married George Wall, a fisherman. Their early Life together was nomadic, taking them from New York to Philadelphia before they eventually settled in the thriving port city of Boston. Massachusetts. It was in Boston that Rachel's life took its darkest turn. According to accounts from the time, George Wall, perhaps driven by financial hardship or a thirst for easy gain, convinced Rachel to join him in a life of piracy. Around 1781, they acquired a small vessel, the Essex, and began to operate in the waters of the New England coast, particularly near the Isles of Shoals, a cluster of small islands known for their treacherous currents and frequent storms. Their method of piracy was insidious and cruel. They would deliberately wait for harsh weather conditions, for storms to brew and winds to howl. Then they would cleverly disguise their vessel to appear as if it had been severely damaged by the tempest, with rigging askew and sails tattered. Rachel, often standing prominently on the deck, would cry out for help, mimicking the distress of a shipwrecked crew. Compassionate passing ships, seeing what they believed to be a vessel in peril, would inevitably draw near to offer assistance. This act of forced distress was a deadly trap. As soon as the unsuspecting ship was within reach, Rachel and George, along with their crew, would abandon their charade. With pistols drawn and cutlasses flashing, they would swarm aboard the target vessel, overcoming its surprised crew. Their raids were swift and brutal. They would steal all cash and valuable cargo, and tragically, they would often kill the sailors, leaving no witnesses behind. This cold-blooded efficiency allowed them to operate for a period without detection between 1781 and 1782. Rachel and George Wall's piratical enterprise was disturbingly successful. They are believed to have robbed at least 12 ships, accumulating over $12,000 in cash and various plundered goods. More chillingly, they were implicated in the deaths of approximately 24 sailors during their short reign of terror on the seas. However, the sea, which had offered them opportunity, also proved to be their undoing. In 1782, during a particularly violent storm, George Wall and several of their crew members perished when their ship was wrecked. Rachel Wall, by a twist of fate, was rescued and managed to make her way back to Boston, stripped of her pirate crew. And her husband, Rachel Wall, attempted to resume a semblance of normal life, finding work as a domestic servant. Yet, the law of easy money, or perhaps the desperate habits formed during her piratical days, proved too strong. She continued to engage in petty theft and larceny, often targeting docked ships in Boston Harbor under the cover of darkness, stealing what she could find. Her life of crime eventually led to her final, fatal arrest. On March 18, 1789, Rachel Wall was accused of highway robbery. The specific charge was that she had assaulted a 17-year-old girl named Margaret Bender on a public road in Boston, stealing her bonnet, shoes, and shoe buckles. Despite her previous admissions of piracy during her confession, she vehemently denied this particular charge, maintaining her innocence in the incident with Bender. Her trial took place on August 25, 1789. Despite being represented by a prominent lawyer of the time, Christopher Gore, the jury found her guilty of highway robbery. In the young republic, such a crime, particularly when linked to a known criminal past, carried a severe penalty. Rachel Wall was sentenced to death by hanging on Thursday, October 8, 1789. At the age of 29, she was executed on Boston Common, alongside two male convicts, William Smith and William Dunnigan. Accounts suggest that thousands of people gathered to witness the macabre spectacle, a common public event in that era. In her final moments, Rachel Wall, while confessing to her past piracies and general thievery, steadfastly denied the highway robbery that sealed her fate. She expressed hope that her awful and untimely fate will be a solemn warning and caution to everyone, but more particularly to the youth, especially those of my own sex. With a final prayer, she reportedly committed her soul to God, identifying herself as an unworthy member of the Presbyterian Church. Her execution marked a somber historical footnote. She was the last woman to be hanged in Massachusetts. Rachel Wall's story is a stark reminder that the lines between desperation, survival, and criminality were often blurred in the rough and tumble world of the 18th century. Her piracy was not born of grand political ambition or a thirst for adventure, but seemingly from the harsh economic realities of her life and the influence of a daring husband. She exploited trust and compassion, turning the very human instinct to help into a weapon. her chilling effectiveness, followed by her return to petty crime and her defiant, albeit ultimately futile, plea of innocence at the gallows, paints a complex portrait of a woman who chose a perilous path, and whose tragic end resonates with the finality of an era of lawlessness slowly being tamed. Her name, etched into the records of crime and punishment, continues to whisper a cautionary tale from the early days of the American maritime frontier. As our journey through the annals of female piracy draws to a quiet close, the ship of our narrative gently drifts back to the present, leaving behind the turbulent waters and distant shores of history. We have explored the lives of 10 remarkable women, each a shimmering facet in the multifaceted gem of maritime history. Their stories, though separated by centuries and oceans, are bound by common threads of defiance, resilience, and an unwavering pursuit of autonomy in worlds that sought to confine them, from the vibrant rebellion of Anne Bonny and Mary Reddin, the Caribbean's golden age, whose courage shone brightest amidst the cowardice of their male counterparts, to the strategic genius of Grace O'Malley, the pirate queen of Connaught, who navigated not just the treacherous seas, but the even more treacherous currents of Elizabethan politics. We have borne witness to the chilling vengeance of Jean de Clisson, the lioness of Brittany, whose black fleet became a terrifying symbol of retribution, and the unparalleled power of Saïda Hera, the Moroccan queen who commanded an empire of corsairs from the fortified walls of Tetuan. We marveled at the sheer scale and organizational brilliance of Ching Shih, the former prostitute who rose to command the largest pirate fleet in history, outmaneuvering empires and rewriting the rules of the game. Then we descended into the gritty urban landscape of 19th century New York, where Sadie the Goat carved out a different kind of legend, a testament to raw survival on the waterfront. Our gaze then stretched back to the ancient Adriatic, to the formidable tutor of Illyria, the warrior queen who dared to challenge the nascent might of Rome itself, and finally to the elusive figure of Christina and Ascit, the Swedish baroness turned bandit, and the tragic tale of Rachel Wall, whose brief but brutal piratical career and ultimate demise left a stark mark on the young American Republic. These women, often dismissed as anomalies or relegated to the fringes of history, were, in fact, powerful reflections of their times. Their choices, though often driven by desperation or tragedy, spoke volumes about the constraints placed upon women, the allure of freedom, and the universal human capacity for courage. They remind us that history is not a monolithic narrative, but a mosaic of countless individual lives, many of which defy easy categorization. What do these stories tell us about the human condition? They speak of an unyielding spirit, a refusal to be silenced or confined. They demonstrate that leadership, strategic thinking, and fierce determination are not prerogatives of any single gender. They show us how individuals, when faced with overwhelming odds, can forge their own paths, sometimes through violent means, sometimes through shrewd negotiation, but always with a tenacious grip on their own destiny and what lingers from their time into our own. The echoes of their struggles against societal norms resonate powerfully today, as we continue to grapple with questions of gender equality, individual freedom, and the power dynamics that shape our world. Their lives, though lived on pirate ships and in bandit lairs, are quiet reminders that true strength lies not just in physical prowess, but in the audacity to envision a life beyond imposed limitations. As the last rays of our historical inquiry fade, we are left with a quiet image. A ship, perhaps one of Grace O'Malley's nimble galleys, or Ching Shih's formidable junks, gliding across the vast, timeless ocean. On its deck, a solitary figure stands at the helm, their back to us, facing the endless horizon. The wind whispers through their hair, carrying with it the salt of the sea and the weight of centuries. And as the ship disappears into the distant mists, we are left with a gentle, unanswered question, one that the waves continue to whisper to the shore. How many more untold stories of courage, of defiance, and of forgotten freedom still lie hidden beneath the vast, unfathomable depths of history?